presence. So we're very excited to have the RFDS here presenting with us today. And the RFDS have a really long history with APT, and I'm going to say APT intentionally. And there are quite a few things in common with actually our business and our group. And in doing this, we actually discovered that we're almost the same age. So RFDS is 2 years younger than than APT or the ATG group, and is 92 years old. I think they're in the 92nd, 93rd year. So pretty old. But just comparing that to Qantas, which of course, as we know, just turned 100. So just for today, everyone's on mute. Craig will unmute people periodically as required. And our plan for today is our running time is we'll run till about 5 or 10 past 5. I know there's a few people that need to go at 5 o'clock for a product meeting. What we'll do, we've got a few people to talk, so I'll do a brief intro. We've got Rocky is coming in live from the Kimberley. So that's terrific, and so he's coming live from the Kimberley, which is terrific, and he'll just give us a little bit of an update on how KWA has interacted with the RFDS over time, over the years. And then we have Lana Mitchell, who's speaking to us from the RFDS, and she's going to run through what the RFDS does, which will be great. And then we should have time for some questions at the end, about five or so minutes for questions. If you've got some questions, maybe just send them through on the group chat or send them to me directly, whatever works best for you. So what I might do, I'll just give you a little intro, if I may. So we all know what the RFDS does, but I discovered in doing the planning for this that actually we think we do, and there's a whole lot more to it, and there's so much more than what you first think. And they do a wonderful service and amazing service that we're going to learn more about here. So APT have a long history with the RFDS, and we've been visiting there since the 1980s, certainly that I'm aware of. It was a regular stop in Alice Springs on our camping and our accommodated tours, which through the 80s, and back in the day, these were operating, weekly or more often than weekly. These tours, and they were the backbone of APT in the 1980s and the 1990s. They were actually effectively the river cruising of the day. As a travel company operating in remote regions, we also had cause to use the RFDS on various occasions for some of our travellers. So it was a thing that not only were our travellers fascinated with the RFDS did and were great to be exposed to it, we sometimes depended on them as well. So we currently support the RFDS on our classic tours, and we still visit there with an included visit in the Alice Springs Centre on the tours, the TMA US 15 and the TMA A07 series. However, given the current environment, we're not going to see any visitors to this location this season. Hopefully early next year. But we will continue to work with the RFDS through the Alice Springs and visit that location in the 2021 season on those programs. And of course, it's linked to the KWA programs. The KWA programs have supported as well. And we have Gary Arnett's has been doing some calendars, and I'm going to let Rocky tell us some of the details of some of what Gary's work's done, and then also how KWA also sometimes use the services for the RFDS. So we're looking forward to that. So I'll throw over to you, Rocky, and you might just tell us a little bit about that interaction.
Sure, thanks, Rob. G'day, everyone. I'm coming to you today from our newly renovated Bell Gorge Lodge, and it's beautiful out here at the moment. Not rubbing it in or anything, but yes. Yeah, in the Kimberley, we've used the Royal Flying Doctor Service over many years, as Rob said, and thankfully we only have a couple of evacuations where the aircraft is required every year, but most of the communication with the Royal Flying Doctors is our tour guides and our lodge staff calling the RFDS for assistance with guests, with our guests, to ask different questions about different medical issues that they've got. So we use them a lot for that. Just talking about a couple of incidents that we've had over the years, just so you get an understanding of how it all works. Two that sort of memorable for me. That a few years ago we had a fella at our Mitchell Falls Lodge. He was off to bed and walked up the stairs, the steps of the tent, which is not very high. And he had a bit of a dizzy spell and fell backwards and cracked his head open on the ground. So I was in Broome, and I was just getting into bed that night and got a phone call at 9 o'clock at night. It was the lodge staff up there saying that they called the RFDS and they were on their way, and we had to get in touch with the parks people to come down and light up the airstrip so that the aircraft could land. And by the time it all happened and they got the fella to the aircraft and took off, it was like 1:30 in the morning. And they flew him into Derby hospital overnight. They fixed him all up, and him and his wife actually chartered a plane the next morning and flew back to the plateau and rejoined the tour. So that was a memorable one. Yeah,
That's fantastic.
So we were a little bit worried that rejoining the tour, but anyway, the hospital were fine with it. So yeah, that was one of the memorable ones for me. Yeah. And we've had obviously others that have been along those same lines. So we also have our, as Rob said, one of our tour guides, Gary Arnett, who started making these calendars back in 2016, I think it was, and selling them all around the Kimberley at our lodges, on the tours, and through other locations through the Kimberley. And to date, he has raised $66,000 or nearly $67,000 for the RFDS. So that's been marvellous, and yeah, amazing. Aside from that, all our
also they've been available at our reception at Cheltenham too. Most years, I've certainly seen in the last couple of years as well. So people might have seen the calendars there, and they are quite stunning.
they are very good. I've just got one here. This is the Bungles one. Yeah, just as a bit of an idea. Back up here. Yeah. So yeah, but in saying that, all our tour guides do a fantastic job for fundraising for the RFDS. They have a special tin on the tour vehicles, and that's normally a swear jar or something like that. Play a few games and donate it or earn a bit of money for the RFDS. So that's great. So a big thank you to. Big thank you to Gary for raising the money, all our tour guides, our lodge staff, and for the RFDS for a fantastic service they provide to us.
Yeah, terrific. Oh, thanks, Rocky, and thanks for coming in from Bell Gorge. And just as an aside, are you happy with how Bell Gorge has come up?
It's coming along really, really good. Yeah, so I'm on site here with a few tradies at the moment. They're just doing some finishing off. Yeah,
terrific,
so very good.
Ready good. Ready for the visitors, which will be probably not 2020, 2021.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Excellent. Thanks for taking off the tool belt for a few minutes, Rocky, and coming in and giving us that briefing. We much appreciate it. So with no further ado, I'd like to throw over to Lana, if I may, Lana Mitchell, and again, just so Lana, really pleased to have Lana with us. She's been with the RFDS for about 6 years. She's the communications and marketing specialist there, and she's responsible for the brand and all external national media partnerships, promotions, digital, etc. She works with a small federal team with a total of 12 people who manage government contracts, rural health research, health policy, and advocacy work. Um, as a self-professed storyteller, Lana loves working for a charity that helps more than 1,000 people every day and makes such a difference to the lives of everyday Australians. In her words, the Royal Flying Doctor Service is a dream job for a storyteller, giving her reason to get out of bed every day and keeping her and the team inspired to continue the work they do with stories such as the one that Rocky just told. So Lana's speaking to us today, and similar to us, Lana is also at home. She's on her rural property. Actually, she stopped on the roadside, I think. She's either stopped on the roadside in outback Northern Territory, I think it is. But normally she lives at her rural property just outside of Canberra. With a mother of young teens, she works home three days out of 5, and no doubt that ends up being sometimes 8 days a week. And I think it's
Absolutely.
freezing temperatures down there, but the photos looks a little bit
Really
deceiving.
cold.
I think you said
It's
it was
really cold here.
4 degrees yesterday.
Yeah, and there's a wind chill here at the moment. It's definitely below 0. It's supposed to snow tomorrow and the next day. So yeah, it's nice and cold.
Oh, crikeys. Okay, well, all of a sudden, being locked up in Melbourne doesn't seem quite so bad. Before I do, I just want to again paint the picture before I do actually hand the microphone over to Lana, I just want to paint the picture for everyone and just remind them, so to put it in context, so in addition to Gary's fantastic work, the RFDS is part of the OneTomorrow charities, both the workplace giving, so you can do part of it as your workplace giving, and also the guest giving programs. So if you're in the front end of the business, I call that as a BDM or a consultant, then this is what we will be promoting to. This is one of the causes that we're promoting to our travellers that we support. So our travellers will be interested in this and how this works. So as you know, they give $1, it's tax deductible, and the OneTomorrow Foundation matches it dollar for dollar. So they can do that, and that information is available online, which we might show you at the end of this. But you can also directly affect it through your workplace giving as well, through our workplace giving and OneTomorrow. So, Lana, tell us a bit more about some of the amazing things of Royal Flying Doctor Service. It's more than just a few planes, isn't it?
It is, Rob. Well, first of all, I want to thank everyone for allowing me to be here today and to tell you a little bit about the service, who we are and what we do. I wanted to thank APT and OneTomorrow because the RFDS actually works hand in hand with organisations like your own, particularly for those that are actually out and about in rural and remote Australia. And as Rocky was saying, you actually end up to a large degree being our first responders when something goes wrong. There's a huge number of people that travel through Australia, except for during COVID. But in a normal year, vast numbers of people both work, travel or live within rural and remote Australia. So I'd like to talk to a little bit about that and about the service. I've got a little slideshow that I'll walk through with you, and I will definitely answer questions afterwards. The purpose of this is really to, I guess, enlighten and give a better understanding about what we do and why we exist, but also how support for the Flying Doctor, what benefit there is to supporting us, and also where donations go to, so that you can answer questions and so that you can, I guess, enlighten others. So I will share my screen here. We'll see how this goes. Excuse me. All right, here we go. So the Flying Doctor has been around for over 9 decades. We were started originally way back at the turn of the century because it became really apparent that Australia is a very large place and with a very sparse population. If you go back to the beginning of the 1900s, you'll find that really Australia's growth was inhibited simply by the lack of service or the lack of access to service within rural and remote areas. So townships really couldn't survive, families couldn't survive, businesses couldn't survive unless they had some kind of access to service. And now I'm being distracted by dogs and other things right in the middle of this. Even though our history goes over a period of 9 decades, the need has never really changed, but just the way in which we provide our service has definitely changed. I've got a map here which shows Australia in terms of the size of land mass compared with other countries such as United Kingdom, France or Japan. Now, our population compared to these 3 countries is minuscule. In fact, we have only 25 million people living across 7.7 million square kilometres, which ends up being about 3 people per square kilometre. When you compare that with pretty much any other country in the world, you won't find a country that has this much space. And when it comes to delivering health services, it's this distance really becomes a major challenge. There are 8 million people, so of the 25 million that live in Australia, 2/3 of them live around the coastlines, either the east or the west coastlines or regional areas, and 8 million live in rural and remote Australia. Now, the distance between townships, communities and so forth is often not very well understood. I know that those here who have travelled in rural and remote Australia will know the distance between Alice Springs and Broome or Darwin, or it's not uncommon for people to live in an area where the closest township, even if you could call it a township or a village or even just another homestead, might be 4 hours away. And it's definitely not unusual for the closest hospital to be 6 to 8 hours drive away. So the size of our country really becomes the issue when it comes to delivering health service. Here you can see a map which shows the main flight paths that we have to be able to access any part of Australia, no matter where a person may be. We have 23 aerobases, which you can see there marked on the map. And we have 77 aircraft within our fleet at this time. 4 of them are these jets called PC-24s, and the remainder are either Pilatus PC-12s or the Beechcraft. So we have propeller-driven planes as well as jets. The jets are used for the long haul, and you can see on that flight map there on the flight paths that there really are some long haul flights there. If a person gets into trouble, let's say in Alice Springs, the hospital in Alice Springs is fit for purpose but is very much restricted in terms of what service they can deliver. So it's quite common for a person who gets into trouble in Alice Springs to be taken to the Alice Springs Hospital and then have to be transported from Alice Springs to Adelaide, where a larger tertiary hospital will be able to take on whatever the problem may be. And similarly, you'll find in Mount Isa or Longreach or Charleville or many of these areas that you'll see there on the map, you really do, the RFDS is very well known for basically taking people to a hospital where they can get assistance. We fly the equivalent of 35 times to the moon and back every year with our planes, just over 27 million kilometres flown with our 77 planes. So we do a lot of flying. But we also don't just have planes, we also have a very large road fleet, particularly in Victoria. We have over 140 healthcare vehicles, including non-emergency transport services. So this might be taking an aged care resident to a specialist visit, or at the moment taking them to hospital for COVID. Or it might be a dental truck. So you can see there on this slide, there's a very large semi-trailer. We have a couple of those that actually drive around into country areas where there's no dentist, and they stay in one local area for 2 or 3 weeks to be able to provide services needed. In addition, now the RFDS is typically known for aeromedical retrieval. So that's emergency services. That's the really those are the scary stories. It's, you know, the man who had a heart attack and had his heart stop in Alice Springs and had to have it restarted 65 times before he got to Adelaide. Or it's the example that Rocky gave with the man splitting his head open. Or it might be some grey nomads, you know, travelling around in their caravan and they roll, or maybe they hit a kangaroo and need to be flown for emergency care. There's many different examples of it. So emergency services are very well known, but what isn't known is that we actually are the primary healthcare providers for vast numbers of communities. And you can see there on the left, there's a map with lots of orange dots. And all of those dots are the clinic locations. So this is where our doctors actually fly out and hold a clinic on a regular basis. It might be once a week, it might be once a fortnight, it might be once a month, depending on the size of the community. And for those areas, we are the doctor, we are the mental health nurse or mental health worker, we are the dentist, we are the physiotherapist. We provide all the services that are needed in those areas because they just don't have access to any other health service provision. In addition to that, you'll see on the right a map which has lots and lots and lots of orange dots. These are our medical chests. Now, we have, it's actually gone up. This slide is wrong. It says 2,300. It's actually 3,500 medical chests at this point that are located around Australia. And these are under the custodianship of key people within a community. So they might be at a tourist venue, or they might be at the local general store, or they might be at the post office, or they might be at a well-travelled roadhouse. And the custodian of this medical chest, which is a large steel chest about so high, is, just one moment. I have a dog that is trying to be part of this presentation, which is not needed. The medical chests are filled with all sorts of pharmaceuticals that you would get at a regular pharmacy. So, for example, antibiotics, painkillers, all manner of, you know, anything from eye drops to antibacterial ointments, but also emergency gear, including defibrillators to be able to start a heart after a heart attack, and a number of other things such as snake bite kits and so forth. So our medical chests actually become a little mini pharmacy, and those work in tandem with a very strong telehealth service that runs from all of our different bases around the country. What this means is that a young family, let's say, that is located, let's say 5 hours from Alice Springs in the middle of nowhere with no access to a doctor, no access to a hospital, can call our 24/7 telehealth line and can say, my 2-year-old daughter's had a fever. She's had a fever for 2 days. Don't know what to do. I'm really worried about it. And the doctor will be able to assess what's happening and be able to make a prognosis based on our telehealth service line, and be able to then say, I want you to go to the local medical chest, which may be 20 minutes away or half an hour away, or it might even be in her own kitchen, and say, I want you to go to the medical chest, and I want you to take number 3, and I want you to give your daughter the tablets in number 3 once every hour for, whatever it might be. So these become our little mini pharmacies, and these are managed and controlled from the RFDS nationally to be able to bring pharmaceuticals to areas where they need it, where they just don't have access. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we hold the average of 58 clinics every day. So this is primary healthcare clinics that are held around the country. On any given day, there'll be 58 that are being run to be able to provide services to a local community. And these often become real community hubs. So, for example, if the RFDS clinic is being held once every fortnight, then once a fortnight or once a month, whenever that clinic's being held, people will come from 200, 300 kilometres around, and they will have, the whole, tea and scones and lamingtons, but they'll also have, a number of other things. They'll use those opportunities to teach kids how to brush their teeth, or, how to run some mental health or well-being classes, or or even bring along other external parties, such as maybe financial counsellors or others that those small communities don't get access to otherwise. So this slide really sums up a little bit more about the broad spread of services that we deliver across the country. We have the aeromedical retrieval, we have the GP and nurse clinics, we have the telehealth, which I've mentioned, we have the dental services, we have the mental health and wellbeing, and we also have the patient transport services. This slide shows just some of the statistics just for the last financial year. This is not the most recent financial year, but the financial year prior. So we had 370,000 patient contacts, which equates to just over 1,000 people every day that we provide service to. And you can see there that there's 38,000 people that were transported within 1 year. So that would be 38,000 patients that had suffered some sort of emergency and were taken to a tertiary hospital for service. We provided 17,000 episodes of dental care. We provided 97,000 telehealth consultations, transported 82,000 people by road, and conducted 21,000 GP clinics. And these clinics provide service to everyone from what we would say cradle to grave. So it's all the way from perinatal or prenatal all the way through to end-of-life care. I guess the last aspect of the RFDS, which I really have to mention at this point, is that we're very much front lines at the moment with this national health or the global health pandemic that's occurring. This is a photo taken just a couple of weeks ago from our Western Australia base in Jandakot with our staff in full PPE. So we've, since January or since February, since COVID has hit Australia, the RFDS has transported now 1,100 patients that had COVID or highly suspected of having COVID. And in each circumstance, whether that's by air or by road, we have to kit up in full PPE because, as you can imagine, testing services for COVID are not as available as they are in metro areas. If you live in the city here at the moment, you can quite easily just go down to a local community hub and get a test for COVID. That's not the case if you're in rural and remote areas. So if there is a person that has symptoms that could be or do appear to be COVID, we have to go through that whole process and make sure that that their transportation, the staff and the vehicle that they're being transported in is appropriately decked out. So I thought that was an appropriate point to end. I guess from this point, Craig, I can take questions. I'm sure there must be a few.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Lana. That's absolutely unreal. And I think it's very appropriate to address the current issues of COVID as well, which is on everyone's lips, of course. It's front of mind. I think that's absolutely, I think the most stunning thing that stood out for me there, well, actually there was two, but the most pertinent one is 370,000 patients attended to every year. Just shows what a such an extensive organisation and what a massive impact that you're having and a huge support that you're providing to the communities of Australia. And of course, it's not just the, you were saying when we caught up yesterday, it's not just the residents and the people who live in remote communities. There's plenty of Victorians that you service, but when they're in the Kimberleys or the Northern Territory or outback regions as well.
Absolutely. I noticed that we just had a question that popped up here. I might just see if I can answer that.
Yep.
How are the border closures affecting the RFDS? I hope they aren't, but wondering. The RFDS is not impacted by border closures. Our services are deemed emergency services, and thus we are not restricted. So if we need to fly from Western Australia through to, let's say, Northern Territory, or from, let's say, Alice Springs, and take it to Adelaide down in South Australia, or, you know, whatever it might be, we are not restricted in terms of our travel. However, yeah, very strict protocols apply to all emergency services. So, even though it might sound like a free ticket, it's yeah, it's a lot of protocols that go with it.
Can I ask you a
There was
question?
another. You may, absolutely. I was just going to. There was one other question here about operating budget. Should I
Yep.
answer that one
Go
first?
for it. It's related to my questions. Go for it.
So Gary has asked what our operating budget is. The RFDS is a federation of 7 different companies. And I work with the Federation Office, which is the one that is responsible for managing the government contracts and for managing advocacy and working with industry and doing research and so on and so forth. And each of the other 6 companies are responsible for the actual hands-on services of, you know, aeromedical retrieval, telehealth, GP clinics, dental services, and so forth. If you take all of our 7 companies together, about 1/3 of our budget is covered by federal government, Australian federal government grants. This is majorly our GP and nurse clinics, and our basic dental services and mental health services, as well as our key aeromedical emergency type services. As many of you would know, we have universal Medicare here in Australia, which means that every Australian is entitled to a healthcare system, and the government realises that the RFDS fits into that picture for rural and remote Australians, and so our services to rural and remote Australians are free. There's no charge for them. They come along and they are basically part of Medicare, or they're covered as not as Medicare, but as an associated type fund. Another 1/3 of our budget comes from state governments, and this is really covering the state-specific needs. So, for example, alcohol and drug programs in New South Wales, key Indigenous programs in South Australia. There's a whole number of a raft of different programs that are run from the RFDS that are very much localised to what the local state is needing in terms of service, and the state governments provide about that 1/3 of that budget to be able to provide that. The remaining 1/3 of our operating budgets is covered through fundraising, through donations, through corporate partnerships, and through bequests and philanthropy. So we are very heavily rely on the donations and the generosity of people all over the country and internationally. And if we didn't have that money, we wouldn't be able to cover very key aspects of what we do. As an example, federal government and state governments cannot pay for infrastructure such as planes. They cannot pay for key medical equipment. So there's a lot of basic operating infrastructure that we need and use that essentially has to come from donations and the generosity of our supporters. So I hope that answers that question.
That was my question, is that you've answered there, which was about the funding, which is fantastic, Lana. Thank you. And that's sort of where we can help as well. That's sort of what how it relates to us. So it actually probably leads in quite well to if we could just share our webpage for OneTomorrow. Craig, you might bring that up, I think. And we can show yourself or everybody how OneTomorrow is represented on our website, and where we are suggesting that there's a couple of different donations, or we suggest different donations amounts. But if you just go down the bottom, you can see that a few different donations will do some funding will do different things. So $30 will ensure children in remote areas of Australia can be immunised, and $150 will provide pilots with noise cancelling headsets, and $500 will put a heart monitor in an aircraft or emergency vehicle. So it's really great. And I think the first point, even the immunisation, just speaks to the fact that you're so much more than just providing medical rescues, which is really largely what I started to think initially. I lived in the RFDS is close to my heart as well. I lived in Alice Springs in the early 90s as a child, obviously, and so the RFDS is a really big part of the Alice Springs community. Of course, but I didn't have any appreciation for the depth of the, well, until I've looked into it a little bit, I had appreciation for the depth of work that they do. But now, now having seen this, it's even a greater thing, much greater level of depth, including those 3,500 medical chests that you've got, which is providing facilities all around the country, is just absolutely fantastic. So I'm just conscious of time. I'm going to almost leave it there unless anyone's got any other questions. I do want to just bring up something that came up in the chat there from, I think it's Karen Newbury, who said, thank you so much. I'm sorry if I have to go, but my mum was a pilot and did a lot of fundraising for the RFDS. This is very, very close to her heart. So that's
fabulous.
So that's lovely as well. That's really nice.
There was one more question here, which is how many of the pilots trained healthcare workers? I'll very quickly answer that. No, they're not. All of our planes are single pilots, or we don't have co-pilots with the RFDS. So the single pilot is responsible for the plane and for getting it safely to where it needs to go. But they normally just fly with a single flight nurse, and that's it. So it's normally a pilot and a flight nurse. The flight nurse is trained in everything: emergency ED, midwifery, you name it, burns, bites, injuries, accidents, you name it. If an accident or an issue is deemed that important enough or severe enough that a doctor is also required, then sometimes a doctor will also go out. But routinely the pilots, though they're not trained healthcare workers, they will be very much working together with the team that they're on the plane with. So they will often help load the patients. They'll often be holding the drip while things are being done. There's all manner of things. When you have such a small team and you're going out into a very remote area, you really have to take it as it comes. And if we have just one very quick moment, I'll tell you a story which might just give an example or highlight the sort of challenges. Last year, I was in Longreach, and we had an open day, and we had a number of people that were coming to look at a plane, and they were all climbing on the plane. There was a lovely young girl there, and I said, "Oh, are you familiar with the RFDS?" She said, "Oh, yes." She said, "I actually work at the Longreach Hospital, and I did my internship with you." And I said, "Oh, that's fabulous. How was it?" She said, "It changed my life as a healthcare professional. It just completely changed my view on what can happen." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, one day we went out on a plane to retrieve an elderly lady. She was 83 years old, and she had 2 knee replacements at some point in earlier years or recent years, and there'd been a huge amount of rain in that area, and this area, doesn't normally get a lot of rain, and there'd been a huge amount of rain and flooding and so forth, and the elderly woman had gotten stuck in the mud and had actually torn both of her knees and trying to get herself out of the mud. And so they had to land the plane, and the locals who had been responding as emergency first responders had taken her to the local, there's a little local hall, and they had there was nowhere to put her, so they put her on the kitchen table. So this little old lady was on the kitchen table, and they had a plank, and so they didn't have a splint or anything, and so they had put her on this table, and she received medical care and so forth there, and she was they'd put her on this large board, and then they went to go to take her on the plane, and they couldn't get the board out through the door. So the board didn't fit through the door. And of course, they can't tip the little old lady sideways with 2 broken legs, 2 broken knees. So they took the entire siding of the old hall off. So all the locals came and they tore the side of the building off so that the little old lady could be gotten to the plane. And this was a story that was relayed to me by this lovely health worker. She said, you know, they just don't teach you this in university. They don't teach you that you need to make sure you can get out through the door. She says, there's things that happen when you're in the outback that you just can't, you couldn't make a story about it. You couldn't, you know, it's just beyond the beyond. And so it's with that, it's our health teams, our pilots, our flight nurses and our doctors really have to be able to think on their feet and to be able to solve whatever problem comes to them, whatever it might be, and just really have the patient first and go with the view of how do we bring help to this patient. And it's, I guess, in closing, I guess I'd say there's what we call the Aussie spirit, and there really is. I do truly believe there is very much an Aussie spirit, and that Aussie spirit is, you know, she'll be right. We'll get through this. It'll be all right. You know, we can. It's quite. There's quite a bit of endurance that an Australian can take generally,
Yeah.
and the RFDS tends to personify that. It really is. You know, it doesn't really matter what the world throws at us. We will figure it out, and we'll get you to hospital, and we'll help you out, and we'll sort it out, and it's
Well,
going to be okay.
You have to have a can-do attitude because, like you said, it's only a
You
team
do.
of two. You're out there, and at the end of the day, you've got to find a way to make it work and provide that
You
help,
have to.
assistance and support. So
That's right, and that's right, and it's not just the relying on the team itself. It really is relying on the communities. So the RFDS is very much part of the communities, as Rocky would know. You know, we are known and loved by the communities we serve, and we really consider ourselves privileged to be able to be part of them and to be able to bring our services to those areas. And so really everything we do is more about the service and about the patients rather than about us. So I hope that's enlightened you, and
it's fantastic.
yeah.
It's absolutely fantastic, Lana, and we have been privileged to have you come and join us and talk to us today. And I was thinking you were sitting on the side of a road in the Northern Territory or WA, but noting that there's no traffic at all, it's probably a Victorian road, actually. But we better let you get going and back on your way again. There. But thank you very, very much for all you've shared with us. And to everyone again, have a look at the OneTomorrow website. And also, as I said, on the intranet is the payroll giving if anyone's interested in directly supporting it. But please do be aware of our guest giving program that will be released soon to our travellers, and of which RFDS is an important part of, particularly as we focus ourselves on domestic travel over the next year or so. So thank you, Lana, very much. Thank you very much to everyone for attending today and today's talk. Thank you to Craig and Louise Mitchell for setting up today as well. That's much appreciated. And I will wish everyone adieu, and thank you all very much for coming.
Thanks, Lana.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lana.
No worries.
Thank you.
That was incredible.
That was fantastic.
Very welcome.
Thank you.
You.
Thanks, Lana. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Lana.
Thanks. Bye-bye.